In this demo, we will learn how to make sure that our controllers require authentication. And we will learn how to access these secured controllers by using the token we just generated. We know from the slides that the bearer token authentication scheme is used to send a token to the API on each request. There's a piece of middleware that we can use that will validate the incoming token, the JWT bearer middleware. Let's open the NuGet dialog and let's look for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.authentication.jwt bearer. There we go. Let's install version 6, as that matches our framework version. And there we go. Time to configure it, and as you know by now, that's something we do in the program class. The first thing we want to do is call into add authentication on our services collection. By doing so, we register authentication-related services on the container. The value we can pass through here is the default scheme. What we want to pass through is bearer. After that, we call into add JWT bearer to register the services related to bearer token authentication. It's this middleware that we want to configure. And that's exactly what we do by passing through an action to configure it. What we want to configure is how we're going to validate the token. On the options object, you can find a token validation parameters object. It's that object that we're going to new up. We state that we want to validate the issuer, the audience, and the issuer signing key. The expiration time of the token is automatically validated. If the token has expired, the client must request a new one to be able to continue. We pass through the issuer as the authority value. That is the value from our configuration file. It ensures that we only accept tokens created by that authority as potentially valid. In this case, that means that our API is only going to accept tokens created by our API. We also pass through the value which is valid for audience from our configuration file, because we want to check whether the token is effectively meant for this API. If these values don't match, the token won't allow access to the API. We also set the issuer signing key. We need to import a few namespaces for that, Microsoft.IdentityModel.tokens being the first one and System.text being the second one. This signing key again matches the values we used for creating the token. And that's it for setting up the bearer token authentication middleware. We also want to ensure that the authentication middleware is added to the request pipeline. For that, we call into use authentication. As we know, the order matters when working with middleware. We first want to check whether the request is authenticated before allowing it to go through to the next piece of middleware. So, before the actual endpoint is selected, and before we check potential authorization policies, we first want to check whether the request is authenticated at all. And with that, our middleware and request pipeline have been configured. Let's save this. There's one thing left. We need to ensure that our controllers effectively require authentication. For that, we apply the authorize attribute at the level of our controllers. That's defined in Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.authorization. We don't do this for the authentication controller, as that must remain accessible for unauthenticated users that want to authenticate. Alright, let's give this a try. We're back in Postman. Let's try getting cities. That doesn't work anymore. We get back a 401 unauthorized. So far, so good. Let's get a token. We've got our request from the previous demo still lined up here. Let's get a new one and let me copy it. And in our request to get the cities, let's set it as an authorization header. So what we do here is pass through the token we got from the previous request. Let's send this request again. And there we go. This time we get back a 200 OK with the resulting list of cities in the response body. Setting the token here as bearer token resulted in a new header being added, an authorization header with value bearer and our token. It's that fact that enabled access to our API again. So far, so good. In case of the demo, the client was Postman. In a real-life scenario, the client will probably be an Angular application or an ASP.NET Core MVC application. In that case, it's up to you to ensure that an authorization header with value bearer and the token is added on each outgoing request to the API. In Angular, an HTTP interceptor would be a good idea for that, and in ASP.NET Core, you can use HTTP client for that. You can add it manually on each request, but you can also use a message handler for that. Anyway, we've gained access again to our API. But that begs the question, how can we gain access to that user, so the user's claims in our controllers? Because more often than not, you will need information about the user at level of your controller. Let's check that out.